In June of 1932, the golf world turned its attention to the English coast. From June 8th through June 10th, Prince's Golf Club in Sandwich, Kent, hosted the 67th Open Championship. Prince's was an exposed links course filled with deep bunkers and punishing hazards, and hidden inside Gene Sarazen's golf bag was a club almost nobody had seen before. It did not look dramatically different from the front, but underneath the head was a strange, unusually wide sole that Sarazen had built through months of experimentation. He was so worried that officials might reject the design that, according to accounts from Prince's, he kept the club upside down in his bag between shots to conceal the sole. Then he started using it. During the championship, Sarazen found the same greenside bunker on 3 separate occasions. 3 times he escaped. While other players struggled with the hazards, Sarazen's unusual club allowed him to attack the sand with a confidence that was rare for the period. By the end of the week, he had won the Open by 5 strokes and broken the championship scoring record. Open as well, and the basic design hidden in his bag would eventually become one of the most important pieces of equipment in golf, the modern sand wedge. To understand why Sarazen's idea mattered so much, you first have to understand what bunker play looked like before it. Golfers did have lofted clubs. One of the most common was the niblick, an early ancestor of today's short irons and wedges, but these clubs usually had relatively narrow soles and leading edges that could dig aggressively into soft ground. That was a serious problem in bunkers. If the club entered the sand too steeply, the leading edge could bury itself beneath the surface and lose enormous amounts of speed. If the player tried too hard to avoid the sand, the opposite mistake was possible, catching too much of the ball and sending it racing across the green. Sarazen later described bunker play as one of the parts of his game that bothered him. Sometimes he caught bunker shots too cleanly. Other times the club dug too deeply into the sand. He wanted something more predictable, and Sarazen was not the first golfer to think a specialized sand club might be the answer. Years before his invention, designers had experimented with unusual bunker clubs. One important example came from Edwin McLean, who patented a sand iron with a broad sole and a concave face. Horton Smith used one. Bobby Jones was given one and famously used it during his 1930 Open Championship victory at Hoylake. But that type of club soon faced a problem. In 1931, the USGA ruled the concave-faced design non-conforming. That did not eliminate every possible sand club, but it did remove one of the best-known specialized solutions. There was still room for a club that could move through sand more effectively while retaining a conventional flat face. That was the problem Sarazen was about to solve. According to Sarazen's own later account, the inspiration came from somewhere completely unexpected: an airplane. Sarazen was receiving flying lessons from Howard Hughes, the famous American aviator and industrialist. While observing the aircraft's control surfaces, Sarazen began thinking about what happened when the geometry at the rear of a moving object changed. He later described making a connection between that idea and his golf club. What if, instead of allowing the sharp leading edge of a niblick to enter the sand first and dig downward, he could lower and widen the rear portion of the sole? The physics of an aircraft moving through air and a golf club moving through sand are obviously not the same, but the observation gave Sarazen an analogy: change the geometry at the rear, and perhaps the object would behave differently. In the case of the golf club, Sarazen's answer became what golfers today know as bounce. Bounce describes the relationship between the leading edge of the club and the lowest part of the sole. With positive bounce, the sole can resist digging too deeply when it interacts with soft ground or sand. Instead of the narrow leading edge immediately burying itself, the wider sole helps the club move through the surface more effectively. That basic idea is now completely normal. In 1931, it was anything but. Sarazen took the idea back to Newport Richey, Florida. By this stage, he already had a long relationship with Wilson Sporting Goods. Historical accounts place him on Wilson's advisory staff from 1922, making him one of the company's earliest athlete advisors. Sarazen obtained several niblick heads and began experimenting. He added material to the sole using lead and solder. He tested different shapes. He changed the amount of material underneath the club. The important innovation was not on the face. Sarazen kept the face full. He created a wider flange and moved the lowest portion of the club behind the leading edge. That allowed the sole to interact with the sand before the leading edge could simply knife downward. This was not not the first specialized sand club in history, but it was a different solution from the concave-faced clubs that had just been ruled illegal, and unlike those earlier designs, Sarazen's concept would become the model for the modern sand wedge. By the time he traveled to England for the Open in 1932, he believed the club was ready, but he was not completely sure how officials would react. The design looked unusual compared with the narrow-soled irons of the period. Sarazen later said he feared the club might be prohibited if officials examined it before he had the chance to use it, so he hid the most distinctive part. According to the history preserved at Prince's, Sarazen returned the wedge to his bag upside down after bunker shots, keeping the unusual sole from attracting too much attention. That secrecy has become one of the most famous parts of the story, but the club itself did not stay unnoticed for long. Prince's had deep lynx bunkers, and Sarazen repeatedly showed that he could escape them. One bunker in particular became associated with him. During the championship, Sarazen found the same trap 3 times, and all 3 times he got out successfully with the new wedge. Today, that bunker is still remembered in connection with his victory. The club might have remained physically hidden in his bag, but its effect was becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Sarazen opened the Open with a 70. That gave him a 1-stroke lead. In the second round, he shot 69 and stretched the advantage to 3. A third-round 70 pushed his lead to 4. By the time Sarazen began the final round, he had controlled the championship from the opening day. His closing 74 gave him a total of 283. McDonald Smith finished second at 288. Sarazen had won by 5 strokes. More importantly for the history books, his total of 283 broke the previous Open scoring record by 2 shots. He had led outright after every round, and he had won the only Open championship ever staged at Prince's. The new wedge had now survived the biggest possible test, but Sarazen's month was not finished. Open at Fresh Meadow Country Club in New York. Fresh Meadow was familiar territory. Sarazen had previously worked there as the club professional, but his second major of the month started very differently from the first. At Prince's, Sarazen had led from the opening round. At Fresh Meadow, he had to chase. He opened with a 74. Olin Dutra led after the first round with a 69, leaving Sarazen 5 strokes behind. Sarazen then shot 76 in the second round. His 36-hole total was 150. At the halfway point, Philip Perkins and Jose Jurado were at 145. Sarazen was still 5 behind, and the tournament format made the challenge even harder. Gene Sarazen would have to play 36 holes on Saturday if he wanted to erase the deficit. In the morning third round, he steadied himself with an even par 70. Then came the final round. Sarazen shot 66. It was one of the greatest closing rounds in the championship's early history. His 4-round total was 286. Bobby Cruikshank and Philip Perkins finished 3 strokes behind at 289. Sarazen had won the U.S. Open again. That victory completed an extraordinary transatlantic double. Bobby Jones had previously won the Open and U.S. Open in the same year. Sarazen now became the second golfer to do it and the first professional. The wedge was not responsible for every stroke of those 2 victories. Sarazen was already one of the finest golfers in the world, but the club had gone from experimental workshop idea to major championship equipment in a matter of months, and unlike some earlier sand club designs, its central principle did not disappear. It spread. Sarazen's relationship with Wilson allowed the idea to move from his personal equipment into commercial golf. Wilson adapted the wide-soled, bounce-based concept into a manufactured sand iron. By 1933, the Wilson R90 had appeared. The club carried the basic characteristics that made Sarazen's design so effective: substantial loft, a wide sole, and positive bounce designed to resist digging in sand. Historical accounts credit Wilson with selling around 50,000 R90 sand irons in 1933. That number should be treated as a historical industry figure rather than a modern audited sales report. But even with that qualification, it illustrates how quickly the concept was accepted. Golfers did not need to understand the geometry. They simply needed to see what happened when the club entered a bunker. Instead of relying almost entirely on perfect contact with a narrow sole, players now had a club specifically designed to interact with the sand. The sand wedge became a distinct category of golf equipment, and once golfers experienced the advantage, it became difficult to imagine a full set of clubs without one. The remarkable part is how familiar Sarazen's original geometry still looks today. Modern wedges are radically more sophisticated. Manufacturers can use different steels, computer-controlled milling, highly engineered grooves, precise centers of gravity, multiple sole grinds, and numerous bounce options. A modern wedge can be designed for firm turf, soft turf, steep swings, shallow swings, open-face bunker shots, or full swings from the fairway. Sarazen did not have any of that technology. He had a niblick, metal, solder, and an idea. Yet when the USGA later measured one of Sarazen's original wedges, the numbers were surprisingly modern. 5 degrees of loft, 5 degrees. Those specifications would not look strange at all on a modern high-lofted, high-bounce wedge. A golfer today could walk into a shop and find clubs in essentially the same general range. That does not mean modern wedges are copies of Sarazen's club. They are not, but it demonstrates how fundamentally sound his geometry was. Nearly a century of engineering has refined the concept without eliminating it. Positive bounce remains one of the central principles used in sand wedge design today, and that is what makes Sarazen's invention so important. He did not invent bunker play. He did not invent the first club designed specifically for sand, and the idea did not emerge from a perfect scientific calculation. It came from a golfer trying to solve a very practical problem. Sarazen struggled with the way narrow-soled clubs behaved in bunkers. He noticed an idea while learning to fly. He experimented with the sole of a niblick. He arrived at a wide flange that resisted digging. Then he took it to one of the biggest tournaments in the world. He hid the sole in his bag. He escaped the same bunker 3 times. He led the Open from start to finish. He won by 5's Open with a 66 and won another major. And after that, the idea spread from one golfer's experimental club into golf bags around the world. Almost everything about wedges has changed since 1932. The metals have changed, the grooves have changed, the manufacturing has changed, the shapes, grinds, and weighting systems have changed, but the basic problem remains the same. When a golfer swings a wedge into soft sand, the leading edge wants to dig, and one of the most effective ways of controlling that tendency is still the same principle Gene Sarazen discovered almost a century ago. Put bounce underneath the club, so the next time you step into a bunker, open the face and watch the sole move through the sand. Remember where that idea came from. Not from a modern computer simulation, not from a multi-million-dollar research laboratory, but from a golfer in the early 1930s who looked at the underside of a niblick and decided there had to be a better way. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and comment below which stories you want me to cover next.